Takumi has been summoned to another world and finds himself standing before the goddess Nolan, but the first thing she does is sincerely apologize because this was all a huge mistake. She explains that when a summoning spell is activated, it randomly selects a bunch of losers from Earth to be isekai'd. But Takumi's life was actually going pretty well, so he was meant to be excluded from the summoning. However, an error occurred causing him to be dragged here alone with all the others. And it's all because the Holy Sidonia Empire decided to recklessly activate the summoning spell. Since Takumi was never meant to be summoned, Nolan brought him up here instead, while all the other summoned heroes went straight to Sidonia. Takumi asks her if she can just send him back to Earth since he was summoned by mistake, but unfortunately, she can't do that. She was so pissed off at Sidonia for using the forbidden summoning spell that she immediately patched it out of this world's magic laws, so no one can move between worlds anymore. And that means Takumi is stuck here permanently. The process also kinda killed him, so there's that too. Takumi starts freaking out upon realizing that he's a disembodied ghost, but only tells him he doesn't have to worry because she has a plan. She can't send him back to Earth, but she can give him a new body and have him become a citizen of this world instead. And as an apology, since this is partially her fault, she offers to grant him her blessing to make his life easier. Takumi doesn't really have much of a choice, so he agrees to be reborn into this world, and Nolan is glad to hear that because it makes this a lot easier for her. She tells him to open his status screen to check out the new life he will have, and when Takumi does, he finds out that Nolan is planning to give him a 17-year-old body, even though he's 40. Nolan tells him not to bother with the minor details, and more importantly, he still needs to pick out his job. She tells him that there are two main classes for jobs, so if Takumi wants something more combat-focused, he can pick things like swordsman, knight, or hunter. But if that doesn't appeal to him, then he could always pick one of the production jobs instead. Takumi doesn't like the idea of having to fight, so he decides to go with a production job after all. Nolan then proceeds to implant the job in his soul, along with a bunch of other bonus blessings, and sends him on his way, completely forgetting to give him a tutorial. Takumi crash lands in the middle of a forest, and after finally picking himself off the ground, he sees his reflection in the river and realizes that he really has become a different person, and he doesn't have arthritis anymore. He decides to make the best of his new life and goes to look in the bag Nolan dropped off with him to see what's inside. In the bag, he finds some food rations and some money, so it looks like he doesn't have to worry about starving for now. He then takes a look at his status screen, and it looks like Nolan really hooked him up with all the useful skills he could ever need. He even has elemental magic, so he decides to try that out first to see if he can really use it. He opens his hand and calls out Water Ball, and just like that, a water ball forms in his hand. The other elements work the same way, so Takumi is easily able to use them on his first try, but now he has figured out how his magic works. He has to start thinking about his next move and decides to head for the nearest village. While walking, Takumi comes across a stick in the middle of the path, and it looks like a really nice stick, so he uses his appraisal skill to scan it and finds out that this is Trent wood. It's gotten from the trade monster, and it is really useful for making things like magic staves and spears, so Takumi decides to put his modeling skill to the test and uses it on the wood to create a spear. Since the wood works so well, Takumi decides to scan around to see if there are any other useful plants nearby, and he finds a ton of them, so he spends the next hour picking them, but now he doesn't know what to do with all these. They definitely won't fit in his bag, so he might have to leave them behind, but then Takumi remembers that he has an item box skill, so he uses it to store all the plants. Just then, he hears someone scream, and a few moments later, he sees a little girl run out of the bushes. The little girl comes to him for help because there's a monster chasing after her, and when Takumi turns to see what kind of monster it is, he finds a massive horned rabbit. The rabbit charges at him and nearly impales Takumi, but at the last second, he freaks out and accidentally stabs the rabbit in the head, killing it instantly. He is shocked that a beginner like him was able to win against a monster like that, so he assumes it must be because of Nolan's blessing, but Nolan had nothing to do with it. It was just dumb luck. As a result of his fight, Takumi earns the job title of warrior, but he's not happy about it since he was hoping to avoid fighting altogether. But that's not really important right now since he still has to check if the little girl is alright. Molly says she's fine and explains that she was out here picking herbs, but she accidentally got too far from the board village and ended up getting attacked. Upon hearing her mention a village, Takumi gets excited and asks her if it's alright for him to come to the village. Molly tells him she'll show the way, but before that, she asks if he's planning on taking that rabbit with him since their meat is really tasty. Takumi realizes it would be a waste to leave it here, so he stuffs the rabbit in his item box, but immediately after doing so, he realizes that he just did that in front of Molly even though he was planning to keep his item box skill a secret. Well, there's nothing he can do about it now, so he and Molly start walking over to the village. And at the same time, the other people who got summoned have just arrived in the Empire of Sidonia, and they are incredibly confused about what's going on. None of them are hurt, but they have no idea where they are, and all of a sudden, they hear someone call out to them as heroes. A woman approaches and tells them that they are no longer in their original world, and that they have been summoned to use their power as heroes to save this world. She introduces herself to them as the Empress of the Sidonia Empire, Elizabeth, and one look at her face makes the kids realize that she's shady as hell. Just then, Akane's unique skill kicks in, and it seems Nolan granted her the blessing of revelation, so if she follows her gut instinct, she will naturally arrive at the right answer. And right now, Akane's gut is telling her that Elizabeth is a backstabbing bitch, so she can't be trusted. Meanwhile, Takumi has arrived in the Board Village, and Molly's parents come out to thank him for saving their daughter. Molly's dad introduces himself as Banga, and his wife over here is Martha. They think Takumi is a really responsible guy to have traveled so far on his own, and on that note, Takumi asks them if it would be alright for him to stay in this village for a while since he has nowhere else to go. They tell him he is welcome to stay, but unfortunately, they don't have an inn in the village, so there's nowhere for him to stay right now. But they could always just build him a house though. All the villagers gather around an empty plot of land and are about to begin work, but Takumi wants to make himself at least somewhat useful, so he uses his earth magic to flatten the ground for the foundation. This is the first time he has used magic on such a wide scale, so he almost passes out from mana depletion. The villagers are all amazed that Takumi can use earth magic so easily, so Takumi asks if they think he just did something strange, but they tell him not to worry about it. Since he has taken care of the foundation, the rest of them get to work assembling his house for him. And by the next morning, Takumi's house has been completed. Thanks to his carpentry, blacksmithing, and sewing skills, Takumi was able to make a good set of furniture for himself. But there's something else he's been meaning to try out. He got a bunch of ores from the village blacksmith, boron, so he wants to try using alchemy to extract the metal. He's got iron ore, silver ore, copper ore, and even some magic iron ore, so he starts off with the iron and tries to make an iron ingot from it. Normally this would require a large furnace and hours of work, but with Takumi's alchemy, he can do it all at once, but it drains a ton of his mana in the process. His first attempt at ore extraction was successful, and Takumi is really excited, so he wants to keep extracting as much as possible so he can make stuff with it later. A couple of hours have gone by, so Molly comes over to Takumi's house to bring him some dinner, but when she opens the door, she is shocked to find him passed out on the floor looking like he's been sucked dry. Takumi had overdone it with the ore extraction and nearly died from mana depletion, but Martha and Banga gave him a recovery potion, so he's alright now and can keep practicing his alchemy, although they made him promise not to overwork himself anymore. Over time, Takumi extracted a bunch of iron, copper, and even a bit of gold too, so he was able to make a ton of useful tools with them. And once he was done with alchemy practice, he would spend time with Boron in the forge learning how to make all kinds of weapons. The blade turns out really well, and once Boron is done making the sheath, it will be complete. Takumi's blacksmithing skill is now level 40, so he's done practicing that for now and decides to move on to something else. He goes over to Banga and asks if he can borrow a couple of potions, and Banga has no problem lending him some, but all the potions are basic, so he won't get much use out of them. Takumi tells him that that's fine since all he needs is a template for what a potion should look like. He's thinking of making some potions of his own with all those herbs he gathered in the forest, and Banga is happy to support Takumi in any way he can, so he offers to buy some potions from him if he completes the first batch. Takumi thanks Banga, and after he gets the basic potion, he starts working on his own version. He makes it with some hilcock leaves and water, and when he's done, he puts it in a glass jar so he can compare it to the one he got from Banga. Both of them are blue, but the one Takumi made is notably more blue than the one he got from Banga, plus it seems to have magic in it, but Takumi isn't sure if this is a success or not. He's going to have to test the potion himself to make sure it isn't harmful, but he doesn't want to end up dying if it turns out to be poisonous, so he decides to build up some poison tolerance, and the best way for him to do that is to eat whatever this is until he's about to die, and then use healing magic to cure himself. He's been doing this for a couple of hours now, and he feels like absolute shit. On the bright side, curing himself so much has granted him the purification skill, and that's definitely going to come in handy at some point. As Takumi is getting back to his feet, he hears a noise behind him and finds a massive boar staring him down. The boar clearly isn't friendly, so Takumi grabs his spear and gets ready to defend himself, but as the boar charges at him and he tries to use the spear, it shatters on contact, leaving the boar unharmed and Takumi without a weapon. He tries to use all the magic he has available to him, but none of them do any damage to the boar, so he's starting to panic here. And just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, he notices a poison spider behind him, and it looks like it's getting ready to attack, so Takumi is completely cornered. However, instead of attacking him, the spider attacks the boar instead, causing it to miss Takumi. But the boar is still coming for him, so he has to think of something fast. So far, all of his physical attacks have failed, but there's still one thing he hasn't tried yet. As the boar charges at him again, he jumps into the air, and at the moment of contact, he uses his alchemy skill on the boar's head and breaks it down. Thanks to his quick thinking, he managed to survive, and now that he's safe, he decides to go check on the spider since it helped him out earlier. The spider is in really poor shape after it got hit by the boar. He decides to heal it so it doesn't die, and afterwards, he gets up so he can return to the village, but then he receives a notification telling him that he has successfully tamed the spider. He didn't realize it was even possible to take a spider, but he's hesitant to take it with him since the spider is considered a dangerous monster. However, the spider hits him with the cutesy eyes, so he decides to accept it as his pet anyway, and to make it official, he names her Maple. A little while later, Takumi returns to the village and shows everyone the giant boar he killed. They are all amazed that he could defeat something like that, but even more so that he managed to tame a poisonous spider since no one has ever managed to do that before. That aside, Takumi suggests that they all share the boar since he can't finish it alone, so that night a massive feast is held in his honor. While everyone else is having fun, Banga brings the valuable leftovers from the boar to Takumi and tells him he can sell them for money if he heads to the nearest city, Bolton, so that will be Takumi's next destination. All the while, Goddess Nolan has been watching over him, and she's really happy with how well he is progressing. One of her fellow goddesses asks her what she's hoping to achieve by giving Takumi such special treatment. She gave him a special body, a special blessing, and on top of that, she can send him a whole year into the past, before Sidonia actually activated the summoning spell that brought him here, but Nolan says she doesn't have a particular reason for it, she's just doing what she thinks is right. One morning, Takumi finds himself tied up in bed, and he already knows Maple was the one behind it. Maple apologizes, but Takumi has been so busy lately that she felt really lonely and just wanted to get his attention. Takumi realizes he has been so focused on his work that he barely spends any time with Maple, so he decides to take a break from work for the day and play with Maple, which makes her really happy. Just then, Martha walks in to bring Takumi some lunch. It looks like something weird is going on between Takumi and Maple, but Takumi assures her that it's not what she thinks. Martha takes his word for it, but she can't help but notice that the silk Maple produced looks really nice, so she plans to milk Maple dry of as much silk as she can make. Later that day, Martha has successfully created a spider silk shirt, and all the ladies in the village are in love with the texture of the fabric. Takumi hadn't realized spider silk was such a hot commodity, so the ladies explain that spider silk is a luxury item, so only nobles ever get to buy it. Martha asks Maple if she could make some more fabric for her, so Maple starts squirting it out, but this is going to take a while, so she isn't going to get to play with Takumi anymore. Takumi is a little disappointed since he was looking forward to spending time with Maple for once, but he's still got things to do anyway, so he's not too bothered. It has been roughly a month since Takumi first came to this village, and he intends to head to the city soon to study his alchemy, but he can't bring himself to say goodbye to all the villagers after spending so much time with them. Takumi then goes to meet with Boron at the forge so he can continue his blacksmithing practice, and before long, they've made a chest plate that fits Takumi perfectly, as well as some steel toe boots. Boron tells him that the boots will be useful if he ever needs to kick anything, but Takumi doesn't intend to do any fighting since he just wants to be an alchemist. Just then, Bangma shows up, and he's glad to see that Takumi's armor is finally complete, but he's going to miss him once he's gone. He knows Takumi can't stay here forever if he wants to expand his production business, so it's the logical move for him to head to the city where he can sell more of his goods and get a reliable supply of materials. A trader from Bolton is going to come to this village in a couple of days, so Banga arranged for Takumi to ride with him on his way back to Bolton. They are sad to see him go, but they know this is for the best, so they tell Takumi to start getting his stuff ready. Takumi thanks them for all their help and starts heading back to his house so he can pack up, but along the way he runs into Martha while she's carrying a bucket of meat. He asks her what she's up to, so Martha explains that she's on her way to throw away the innards of a horned rabbit that Bangma caught. Apparently, the innards are the most delicious part of the rabbit, but they need to be processed thoroughly to remove all diseases and parasites. This village doesn't have the equipment necessary to do that, so she has to throw the meat away so no one gets sick. However, Takumi tells her that won't be necessary since he can just purify the meat. He bends down and uses purification magic, so the meat in the bucket should be safe to eat now. But while Martha is indeed thankful, she is equally stunned that Takumi can use light magic. She tells him that he probably shouldn't reveal that he can use light magic when he leaves this village because there are very few people in this world who are capable of that, so if people found out he could use it, it would draw a lot of unwanted attention. Takumi takes note of her warning and promises to be careful about revealing his power, but in the meantime, while he's still in the village, he plans to use every bit of his power to make their lives better. He uses earth magic to build up a brick wall for the village's safety, and for convenience, he builds them a water pump as well as a couple of other amenities. By the time he is done, this place looks like a whole new village, so when the merchant arrives, he barely recognizes it. Banga comes out to greet Papek, and after completing their trade deal, Takumi walks up so they can start going. Papek has already heard a lot about Takumi from Banga, so he introduces himself and everyone asks if Takumi has all his stuff ready. Takumi assures them he hasn't forgotten anything, but there is one thing he wants to give them though. He pulls out one of his potions from his bag and gives it to Banga. He already dropped off about 100 of these bottles at Banga's house, so in the event of a disaster, he wants Banga to use these to heal any injuries. Papek is left in shock after seeing the potion Takumi made, so he asks to take a closer look, and it is definitely a high-level potion, although Takumi doesn't seem to realize it. The rest of the villagers soon show up to bid Takumi farewell, so Papek says he will wait for them to finish their goodbyes before he leaves. Molly says goodbye to Maple, who's sleeping in Takumi's sack, and Martha hands him an outfit she and the other ladies made for him out of Maple's silk. Takumi is really grateful for their thoughtful gift and thanks everyone once more for being so kind to him, even though they haven't known him long. He then gets in the carriage and all the villagers give him a huge send-off, telling him he will always be welcome in their village. As Papek and Takumi head for Bolton, Papek mentions that the people of that village seem to really love him. Even the others in the carriage can tell that Takumi was practically family to them, and such a goodbye really tugs at Heath's heartstrings. By the way, these guys are heading for Bolton as well, so the blonde guy introduces himself as Heath, the redhead is Rail, and the gloomy-looking guy over there is named Booger. They are all part of a C-rank party named Lion Fang, and they are currently acting as Papek's bodyguards. Although this region is pretty peaceful, so there isn't actually much for them to do. Rail notices that Takumi is holding onto his bag really tightly, so they ask him if something precious is inside, and Takumi answers, saying his pet killer spider is sleeping inside. The group can't believe Takumi managed to tame a killer spider, so Rail asks to see it, but he's being really creepy about it, so Maple ends up headbutting him in the face. Takumi begins apologizing profusely for what Maple did, but the others tell him there's nothing to be sorry about since Rail deserved it. In fact, Heath wouldn't be surprised if Maple's encounter with Rail makes her fear all humans from now on, but that doesn't seem to be the case since she seems to have taken a liking to Bogar. While everyone starts fawning over Maple, Papek calls Takumi to the front because he wants to talk about the potion he saw Takumi holding earlier. He asks if there are any more of those in stock, because if so, he would love to buy some. Takumi doesn't really mind selling Papek the potions, but all of a sudden, the horse stops and it looks like there's trouble afoot. There is a horde of goblins surrounding the carriage for an attack, which is really bad news, but the others seem pretty excited since this means they finally get to do something, so they tell Takumi and Papek to sit back and let them do all the work as they step out onto the field. There are roughly 20 goblins out in the field, so they are pretty confident they can handle this and start fighting. Rail shoots them down with his bow, while Bogar and Heath attack the rest with their mace and axe. Overall, it doesn't take long for them to wipe out all the goblins, so once they are done, they get to work dissecting the goblins so they can collect the magic stones. And from what Maple has seen so far, she really likes Bogar. She hates Rail, and she doesn't really care about Heath. Shortly after, everyone got back on the carriage and their journey continued for the next 3 days until they finally arrived in Bolton. Once they enter the city, the members of Lion Fang head to the Adventurers Guild to report the success of their bodyguard mission, and Takumi follows them there since he needs to register with the guild to stay in this city. He would have preferred to register with the Alchemist Guild, but there isn't one here, so he's going to have to become an adventurer instead. The receptionist Hans tells Takumi that he can just use the Adventurer Guild card as his identification, and as long as he does a simple quest once every month, it won't expire at all. Takumi ends up registering as an adventurer and also presents Maple as his pet. After all the registrations are complete, Takumi heads to Papek's trading company to work on a deal for the potions. He has roughly 103 different potions in stock, and all of them are of extremely high quality, so Papek is prepared to pay 10 silver coins for each healing and stamina potion and 50 silver coins for each mana potion. Takumi does some quick math in his head and realizes that he would make over 7 million yen from this single deal. He thinks that's way too much money, but on the contrary, Papek informs him that he could have made a lot more money if he already had a reputation as a producer. On that note, since Takumi intends to become a producer in this city, Papek recommends that he get a house with a workshop attached for convenience reasons, but Takumi hadn't even thought about where he would be living once he got here. Pepek decides to help him out a little and calls for his assistant Thomas so he can show Takumi a good property with an affordable rate. However, when Takumi finally sees the house, it looks way more like a mansion, so he doesn't think he can afford it. Thomas assures him that the mansion is quite affordable, and he can guarantee that there are no ghosts here, so he won't have to worry about that. Takumi spots the workshop connected to the house, and he starts considering the purchase since this place would be really accommodating for his work. And he can afford to pay for it, since he got a lot of money from selling those potions to Pepek. After a little deliberation, he eventually decides to pay for the mansion, so he tells Thomas he'll take it. Thomas is glad to hear that and says he will get started on the paperwork immediately, so Takumi can move in tomorrow if he wants, but as they are walking through the city streets, Takumi smells something foul in the air. Thomas can tell that the smell is bothering Takumi, so he explains that the foul stench is coming from the sewers. Rich people have magical purifiers to cleanse their sewage, but the main city sewers have no such luxury. Magic purifiers are really rare since they are only found in ancient ruins and dungeons, so they are too expensive to implement in the city sewers. Some priests are periodically hired to manually cleanse the sewers with purification magic, but the sewers are still filthy most of the time. The next day, Takumi and Maple move into their new house, and the first thing Takumi wants to do is find a solution to the sewer problem. He gets a piece of quartz and clay from Pepek's company, and after using magic to shape it, he uses fire magic combined with space-time magic to bake it quickly. After doing that for a while, Takumi's mana was completely drained, so he had to drink a couple of mana potions, but on the bright side, he did manage to complete his creation. A modern toilet. Just then, he hears Pepek screaming from his living room, so he comes out to check what's going on and finds Pepek wrapped head to toe in Maple's silk. Takumi asks Maple why she would do such a thing, but she thought Pepek would find this to be fun. In her defense, the comforting feel of her silk does put Pepek to sleep, but that doesn't make it right, so Takumi sincerely apologizes for Maple's actions. Pepek tells Takumi it's alright, but getting swaddled so suddenly, it'd scare him a little, so he needs to use Takumi's restroom real quick. However, as soon as he enters, he comes back out and starts asking what this marvel of technology is. Takumi comes over and explains that this thing is a toilet. He attached it to a magical purification device so it automatically cleans itself once you're done with your business. Basically, after you take a dump, it uses purification magic to break down your shit into inorganic materials, and then that gets flushed down the drain. The system makes sense to Pepek, but the only way someone could possibly have made such a thing would be if you had an aptitude for light magic. Takumi realizes he may have messed up since Martha clearly warned him against using his light magic openly, so he asks Pepek to please keep this a secret for him. Pepek understands why Takumi would want to keep his abilities a secret, so he promises not to tell anyone, but he absolutely must have some of these toilets, so he asks Takumi if he can make 100 of them for him. Takumi is hesitant to agree since making just one toilet was a lot of work, but since Pepek is being so insistent, he agrees to do it as long as Pepek can provide the raw materials. Pepek is really happy to hear that, but he can't expect Takumi to make all those toilets by himself, so he suggests that Takumi should make a slave contract. Takumi is taken aback by the suggestion since he would never want to get a slave, but Pepek points out that if Takumi is trying to keep his abilities a secret, then it would be best to get a slave to help with his work since a slave would be bound to secrecy. Having aptitude for light magic is a really good big deal since it means you were chosen by God, and as such, the Church of Divine Light would probably come after Takumi to force him to work for them. They make a lot of profit by monopolizing purification magic, so Pepek doubts they would be happy to learn that commoners can have access to cheap purifications through Takumi's toilets. But Pepek already has an idea of how to get around the church, so Takumi doesn't need to worry about it for now. The most important thing is making sure that the church doesn't find out about his light magic. That's why getting a slave would be the best option for him. But Takumi is strictly against slavery, so he says he will just do all the work by himself. Just then, his guild card begins glowing, so Takumi takes a look at it, and it displays a message saying he needs to complete a verification quest to maintain his status as an adventurer, so it looks like he won't have time to make the toilets by himself after all, so he caves and agrees to buy a slave. Pepek takes Takumi to the Mulan Trading Company since they are the most ethical slave traders around. Pepek goes off to talk with the owner so he can get Takumi a good deal, and in the meantime, Takumi heads out into the garden because it looks pretty. There he finds a beautiful elf girl sitting on a terrace, but the second she sees Takumi, she tells him to get out of here. A little while later, Pepek introduces Takumi to the owner of the slave trading company, Mulan, and tells her that Takumi is interested in purchasing a slave from her. Although he mentions that Takumi was really reluctant about the idea of purchasing a slave, Mulan asks him if there's a specific reason for this, so Takumi explains that in the land where he comes from, selling and buying people was abolished long ago, so doing it here doesn't sit right with him. Mulan can understand Takumi's concerns, but she assures him that in this nation at least the rights and privileges of slaves are preserved to some extent. Basically, it works like this. The owner pledges to respect the slave's basic rights, providing food, clothing, and shelter, while the slave pledges to fulfill their duties. Said duties are clearly laid out in the contract for the slave. But aside from that, the contract also makes it impossible for either the master or the slave to cause lethal harm to one another. Takumi is quite pleased to learn this since it means the slave contract is pretty much a regular job with some rules attached. Mulan goes on to explain that there are several different kinds of slave contracts. In the case where someone becomes due to debt, they will be contracted until they earn enough money to pay back that debt. Other contracts are more permanent and are usually taken by criminals or people who end up being captured in war as an alternative to death. However, the large majority of slave contracts are made by those who were illegally forced into it by bandits. Payback thinks the most suitable one for Takumi would be a war slave since they can't be released without their master's permission, and while Mulan could certainly make that happen, she asks why there is a need to make sure the slave can never leave Takumi. Payback starts talking about how talented Takumi is with production and how he doesn't want his secrets to be stolen, but Mulan wants to hear the reason from Takumi himself. Takumi explains that he is a producer, so naturally he would like to focus on his work as much as possible, but that's a little hard to do since he also has to fulfill quests from the Adventurers Guild. He is currently living in a mansion, so he will need someone to help manage it while he does his work, and due to some particular skills he possesses, he would like to make sure his slave can't tell anyone about him. Additionally, since he will be taking on quests from the Adventurers Guild and harvesting ingredients himself, he also needs his slaves to be a capable fighter so they don't get hurt when they accompany him. Mulan realizes that Takumi has no ill intentions, but there's no way she's allowing him to force a single slave to do both housework and combat, so she'll only work with him if he agrees to buy 2 separate slaves instead. That being said, she knows someone who would be perfect as Takumi's housekeeper, so she calls for Maria to come into the room. Maria was forced into slavery as a child and has been trained in reading, writing, math, and general housekeeping, so she should be a good fit for the job. Maria says she can handle the housework of a mansion all by herself, and Takumi is glad to hear it. But Maria can tell that he's deep in thought, so she asks if something is wrong. Takumi tells her he's just a little confused since he doesn't understand why no one has bought yet Maria considering how cute and capable she is. Maria gets all embarrassed by Takumi calling her cute, so he apologizes since it might have been inappropriate to say. Maria calms down and tells Takumi that she can only do the housekeeping work outlined in the contract and nothing else. Takumi says he's fine with that since he only wants her to do housekeeping work, but Maria wants to make it very clear that she won't do anything else. Takumi doesn't understand why she's talking about it so much since Mulan already explained how these contracts work, but then Maria blurts out that she can't sleep with Takumi. Now Takumi gets embarrassed as well, but he assures Maria that he really does only want her as a housekeeper, not a meat keeper. With that said, Takumi asks Maria if she still wants to form a contract with him, and she says she'd be happy to work with him. Now that that's settled, Mulan says she'll begin working on the contract for Maria, but as for the battle servant, she says she unfortunately doesn't have anyone who fits the description. Maria hears Mulan say this and calls BS because she knows Sophia is still here, but Mulan doesn't take kindly to being called out, so she tells Maria to go back to her room and start packing her things. Once Maria is gone, Takumi asks Mulan if what Maria said was true, and Mulan admits that there is a battle slave in the building, but she doesn't think Sophia would be a good fit for Takumi since she's got a lot of problems. Mulan wants to end the discussion here, but Takumi is kind of curious about Sophia, so he asks to see her. Mulan reluctantly agrees to take Takumi and meet Sophia, and when they arrive at her room, Sophia is surprised to see that the visitor is the boy she met in the courtyard earlier. Mulan informs Takumi of Sophia's history and explains that she was captured as a slave of war in the battle between the Kingdom of Triaria and the Kingdom of Ugar. Although this all happened more than 50 years ago, Takumi is shocked to find out that Sophia is more than 50 years old, so Mulan goes on to explain that the Kingdom of Ugar was an elf nation and elves naturally live long lives. Sophia hasn't been able to form a contract with anyone because she has a hideous scar on her ears, and her right hand and left leg both have impaired movement. This soup already be a deal breaker for anyone looking to buy a battle slave, but on top of that, she also lost use of the elemental magic that elves are most known for, so it's likely that she has a curse on her. Given all these facts, Mulan doesn't think Sophia will be able to help Takumi on his quests, but Takumi wants to confirm it for himself, so he asks to have a minute alone with Sophia. Mulan decides to give him some time to talk to her, And once they are both alone, Takumi grabs Sophia's face and looks into her eyes. He isn't a fan of using appraisal on people without permission, but he needs to check what he's dealing with. He takes a look at Sophia's status screen, and to his surprise, he finds out that her stats are through the roof. Her injuries do limit her abilities, and she does have a curse on her. But if Takumi can fix that, then she will be the perfect companion to have in a battle. Mulan soon comes back into the room to Takumi if he has made a decision yet, so he tells her he wants to take Sophia. Sophia can't believe he wants her and reminds him of all her flaws. But Takumi says he's going to fix it, so it won't be a problem. Mulan thinks Takumi's confidence is pretty interesting, so she agrees to leave Sophia as Takumi's care. A few minutes later, Mulan finalizes the terms of the contract, so the final step is to execute it. The three of them gather together, and Mulan uses magic to bind them to the terms of the contract, so once she's done, Maria and Sophia officially become Takumi's slaves. Maria thanks him for purchasing her and promises to work hard to live up to his expectations, and so does Sophia. The three eventually return to Takumi's house, and as soon as he opens the door, Maple comes jumping out because she's excited to see him again. Both Maria and Sophia are worried for Takumi's safety, so Sophia is about to attack Maple. But before she does, Takumi stops her and explains that Maple is actually his pet killer spider. The two find it strange, but they decide to just act like it's normal, and a little while later, Takumi shows them to one of the empty rooms in the mansion. Sophia and Maria really like it, so Takumi tells them that Sophia can have this one and Maria can take the room next door. Neither of them can believe that Takumi is willing to give them their own rooms, but it's not like he's using the rooms anyway, so he thinks it would be nice if someone got some use out of it at least. Additionally, there's also a large bath, so he tells them that once they are done unpacking, they can use the bath whenever they like, and Maria is really excited about it. Later on, Sophia and Maria get into the bath, and Maria talks about how glad she is that Takumi bought Sophia as well. If she's being honest, she thought Mulan was never going to let Maria leave because over the past 50 years, no matter how much was offered, Mulan rejected anyone who offered to buy Sophia. So for her to sell Sophia to Takumi, she must have seen some good in him. Sophia admits that Takumi seems kind, but she's still a bit skeptical since they know so little about him. While Mulan was drawing up the contracts for the sale, Sophie got a glimpse of Takumi's file, and most of Takumi's history records, like hometown or lineage, were left blank, so if he is keeping that information secret, then there must be something he is hiding. After they are done with their bath, they head outside and are shocked to see that Takumi already prepared dinner for them. Maria is especially devastated since household work is meant to be her job, so if Takumi handles everything himself, then she's as useless as a toilet. Takumi explains that he was just trying to make Maria's first day in the job a little easier, but if it makes her feel better, he will let her handle the rest of the chores on her own. For now, he asks them to sit down so they can all have dinner together, but Sophia is hesitant since servants usually don't get to eat at the same table as their master. Takumi understands that she may think his behavior is strange for a slave owner, but he doesn't want her to get stuck up on tradition. And speaking of tradition, he doesn't really like the fact that they keep calling him master, so he asks if they can just call him by his name instead. Sophia asks if that's a formal order, but Takumi doesn't want to have to force her to call him by name if she doesn't feel comfortable with it. Although Maria seems fine with calling him by name. The next day, Takumi heads to Papex Trading Company to pick up a package he ordered, and Papex says he did his best to wrap it up securely, but he still wants Takumi to be careful when carrying it home. On his way home, Takumi notices a church nearby, so he heads inside and kneels down to pray to Nolan. He thanks her for all the skills she gave him since they've really helped him, but there's something he's been meaning to ask her. In the time he has spent in this world, he learned that the Holy Empire of Sidonia controls the religious doctrine here, so he doesn't understand why Nolan has so much beef with them. Just then, Takumi hears Nolan's voice and sees her standing in front of him, so he freaks out a little. Nolan explains that she heard him praying to her, so she brought him up here so they could have a little chat. And to answer his question from before, she doesn't like Sidonia because they don't follow her will. There are two religions in this world, the Church of Creation and the Church of Divine Light. The Church of Creation has worshipped Nolan since it began, but the Church of Divine Light just does whatever the hell it wants. The Sidonian Empire ended up going on several crusades to spread their religion forceful means, but while all this was happening, Nolan chose to stay out of it since she didn't want to get involved with the petty affairs of humans. Takumi points out that that was dumb move since the only reason Sidonia was able to activate the summoning spell that brought him here was because Nolan didn't intervene until it was too late. And yeah, it sounds bad when he puts it like that, but she gave him all her blessings to make up for her mistake. Although there is something she needs to tell him. Most of her blessings will remain with him forever, but there is one that will fade away. And that's the unusually great luck he has been having recently. She basically gave him a beginner's tutorial by allowing him to meet such nice and helpful people, but soon he will end up meeting people with sinister intentions, so from now on, the results of his actions completely depend on him. A little while later, Takumi returns home, but as soon as he walks in the door, he trips over Maple, who is really excited to see him. Both Sophia and Maria come to check on him, but when Sophia tries to help pick up the package Takumi brought, he quickly stores it in his item box to stop her from touching it. He then gets up and says he's going to do some work in his workshop, so they shouldn't bother him for a while. But Sophia is incredibly suspicious because that package had high-grade magical wrapping paper on it, so it must have been something dangerous. She follows Takumi to his workshop to see what he's up to, and she's horrified to see him dipping a knife in poison and cutting himself with it. He immediately heals himself afterwards, but you've got to admit he looks crazy doing this, so as soon as he randomly mentions Maria's name, Sophia thinks he plans to do something to her and attacks him. Or at least she tries to, but she faints from exhaustion almost immediately, so she just collapses on top of Takumi. Takumi checks her status to figure out what's wrong with her, and he discovers that she is suffering from extreme exhaustion, likely due to her curse. A wound like this normally wouldn't be that difficult to heal, but because of the curse, it takes a lot of effort for Takumi to finally heal her hand, and once he's done, his light magic levels up. He later carries Sophia up to her room, and since his light magic leveled up, he now has enough power to dispel her curse, so he pours all his magic into it, and eventually he is able to fully heal Sophia as well as lift her curse. She's still unconscious due to the exhaustion, but she should be fine once she gets a little rest. A couple hours later, Sophia wakes up, and when she sees Maria, she warns her to run because from what she saw, she is sure Takumi is an absolute lunatic. Maria doesn't know what Sophia is talking about, but she is sure that Takumi is a good person more than ever before. She holds a mirror up to show Sophia what Takumi did for her, and she is shocked to realize that her body has been healed and her magic has returned. She heads outside to talk to Takumi about it, and he confirms that he did get rid of her curse. It took a lot of pain and hard work to level up his skill, but he tells her she doesn't have to worry about it since he already promised to heal her. Sophia realizes that she had completely misjudged Takumi, so she kneels down and pledges to serve Takumi for the rest of her life for the kindness he has shown her. The next morning, Takumi heads to the library to see if he can find any information about alchemy, but it turns out that the entire library only has 4 books on alchemy. Takumi is confused and wonders why alchemy isn't more popular when it's so simple to understand, but in reality it isn't easy at all. All the alchemy texts available are written in this world's ancient language, so the only reason Takumi can understand any of what's written here is because Nolan gave him a blessing that allows him to understand every language in this world. Later that day, Takumi, Maria, and Sophia finish making a bunch of toilets, and while there's still a lot more to go, they're making good progress, so Takumi thinks he should be able to take a break for toilet making for a while. If he won't be making any more toilets for now, Maria asks Takumi what he intends to do, and Takumi answers that he plans to go on some journeys in the near future. Specifically, he wants to try finding new alchemy ingredients, and while he's at it, he wants to see the unique sights this world has to offer and maybe explore some ruins along the way. He already plans to take Sophia with him as his bodyguard, so he's going to have to ask Maria to stay behind and take care of the house while he's gone. However, Maria doesn't like the sound of that. She asks Takumi if she can accompany him on his journey, but he doesn't think that'd be a good idea since the journey is bound to be dangerous. Plus, he mainly hired Maria because he needed a maid to take care of the mansion, so it would defeat the purpose if he took her with him. Maria understands Takumi's point, but being left alone in the mansion would make her feel terribly lonely, so she pleads with Takumi to reconsider. Takumi would feel bad about leaving Maria all alone, but before he makes any decisions, there's something he needs to check, so he grabs Maria's face and uses appraisal to check her stats. And unexpectedly, Maria is pretty stacked. Don't get me wrong, she's not overpowered, but she could definitely handle herself in a fight, so Takumi agrees to bring her along for the journey as long as she's sure she can handle. Sophia says she's willing to teach Maria how to use magic and fight to make sure she is ready for any possible threats, and Takumi likes the sound of that, so he asks Sophia to train both him and Maria. Since they've decided that Maria will be joining the expedition, Takumi thinks it's about time he starts making equipment for everyone, so to start he asks Sophia what kind of weapon she would like. Sophia doesn't hesitate and begins listing off an entire arsenal of weapons she would like, but that's to be expected since she is an experienced warrior. Maria, on the other hand, doesn't know much about weapons, but she did receive a little short sword training from Yulan, so she tells Takumi that a set of battle knives will be fine for her. However, Sophia points out that having only battle knives will put Maria at a disadvantage when it comes to reach, so she should probably get a spear as well. Maria doesn't know how to use a spear, so Sophia offers to give her a quick training montage to show her the basics, and while they do that, Takumi begins working on the weapons. Doesn't take him long to finish crafting all the blades, but it drains a ton of his mana, so he has to drink a mana potion to recover before he can continue. The final step for the blades is for Takumi to cast an attack and auto-repair enchantment on them, so he doesn't have to perform maintenance as often, and once that's done, the blades are finally complete. Now he's going to move on to the handles, but since Maria requested for battle knives, she's going to need a sheath for them. And even though Takumi is a gentleman, he's still a man of culture, so imagining Maria's thick thighs with knives on them nearly makes him pass out. Moving on, the next thing he needs to make is the armor for the girls, but rather than simply asking them to let him measure their sizes, Takumi has a much better idea. He opens up his item box and pulls out 2 life-size dolls of Maria and Sophia he had already made with his Appraisal X skill. But don't ask why he made them though. As for the armor itself, Takumi plans to make it using maple silk and some of the hide he got from the armored boar. And when it comes to the design, he's never had the chance to make armor for others before, so he decides to let his mind run wild and try out all of his outfit fantasies with those dolls. After several days and several redesigns, Takumi finally gives the armor to Maria and Sophia, and it looks great on them. He asks the two if they like it, and both are honestly surprised by how well it fits despite the fact that Takumi never asked for their measurements. It's almost as if he had duplicates of them that he could test the outfits on, but that would be crazy. Right. Takumi changes the subject before they start getting suspicious and asks them what they think of the weapons he made for them. Sophia pulls out the sword Takumi made for her and she says it feels perfect. The same goes for Maria as she tests out her battle knives and she is grateful for the equipment he made for her. There's one more thing Takumi made for the two of them, so he pulls out some rings and tells them it should help with their magic casting. Sophia and Maria accept the rings, but they feel bad about troubling Takumi so much since rings like these are bound to consume a ton of mana. Takumi admits that it was exhausting, but it helped him level up his ice and lightning magic, so it was well worth the effort. After all the equipment had been tested, the three of them head to the guild since Takumi needs to register Maria and Sophia at the guild so they can register as adventurers as well. Since this is their first time at the guild, Maria and Sophia are given the H rank. And while Takumi is here, the receptionist reminds him that he needs to complete at least one quest in order to maintain his status as an adventurer. So Takumi heads over the notice board to see if there are any good quests he can pick out. He is hoping to pick an H or G ranked quest, so he doesn't have to do too much work, but Sophia thinks he would be better off choosing one of the higher difficulty quests since it would help him raise his rank. A couple of bastards overhear that Takumi is H rank, so they think they can intimidate him into running away so they can have fun with Sophia and Maria. They tell Takumi that they are all D rank, so there's no way he could handle them all at once, and they have no problem with beating up a random guy for fun. Maria is about to step in and knock some sense into these idiots, but Takumi stops her and says he will handle it himself. He's absolutely terrified, but these guys not only disrespected him, but more importantly, they disrespected his friends so he can't back down. The D rank guys are offended that an H rank noob like Takumi thinks he stands a chance against them. So the guy with the pot belly tries to punch him with all his might and Takumi just lets it happen. But the only one who gets hurt is the D-rank guy because he broke his hand with that little stunt. All of a sudden, the guild master, Barak, shows up, and he demands to know what happened here because fighting is prohibited in the guild. At first, he thinks Takumi is to blame for all the commotion since he is completely unharmed and the other guy has a broken arm, but Maria tells him Takumi did nothing wrong. The receptionist also backs up their story and explains to the guild master that all Takumi did was take a punch to the face. The guild master still wants to get to the bottom of this, so for now, he asks someone to drive the pot-belly guy away and tells Takumi and his party to come with him since he has a few questions to ask. He believes that Takumi was just defending himself, but he doesn't understand how he did it and would like an explanation. Takumi is a little uncomfortable about revealing personal skill information, but the guild master assures him that all of his information will remain confidential. In that case, Takumi explains that when the guy threw the punch at him, he opened his item box and pulled out a bit of charcoal, which he then used to coat his upper body for defense. And to make sure he wouldn't get hurt, he synthesized the charcoal into diamond. That explains how he broke that guy's fist without doing anything. But while they are on the topic, the guild master thinks it would be a good idea to promote Takumi to D rank immediately. He clearly has the skills to be D rank. And if his rank is high, idiots like the last guy won't be bold enough to go after him just because he has pretty ladies with him. Takumi doesn't think it'd be right for him to get an automatic promotion for no reason, so Hans suggests that Takumi and the others could complete a few difficult quests to justify their rank promotion, and both Sophia and Maria seem to think it's a good idea, so Takumi agrees as well. The quest they were assigned involves exterminating goblins and kobolds and then gather merrill herbs, so they head out into the forest to begin. Maple acts as the group's scout and warns them that there is a group of 4 goblins up ahead. Sophia takes the initiative and volunteers to handle the first 2, so she dashes forward and cuts them down in one swing. The remaining 2 are tripped up by Maple's web, and once they fall to the floor, Maria and Takumi stab them through the neck. Takumi is glad they are doing so well against the monsters, but with that said, they've been encountering way too many monsters out here. They've already killed nearly 100 goblins and kobolds, so Sophia thinks there must be a monster encampment nearby, and if that is the case, then there is likely also a goblin general there. A goblin general is a C-rank monster, meaning it would usually require at least 5 D-rank parties to defeat it, but with Sophia's spirit magic, Maria's earth magic, and Takumi's elemental magic, she is confident that they should be able to beat it. Takumi still feels a bit uneasy about taking on such a challenge, but since Maria and Sophia seem so confident in their strength, he's willing to go along with it. Not to mention they've still got Maple on their side, but all of a sudden, Maple tells Takumi she's about to evolve soon, so she can't fight anymore. Takumi understands and opens a pocket dimension so she can rest inside. But just like me, Sophia and Maria have many questions, like when the hell did Takumi learn to create pocket dimensions? Takumi brushes it off like it's normal and says this is just one of his skills, but more importantly, since Maple can't fight with him anymore, Takumi warns the others that they won't have as much support as they initially thought, but Sophia still thinks they can pull it off. They soon arrive at the goblin camp, and after a little reconnaissance, Sophia concludes that there are around 400 goblins here. Takumi asks her if they really have to fight all those goblins, and normally they would, but Sophia's reconnaissance also revealed that there are no humans in the area, so they are free to blow this place up with magic. The 3 of them prepare their strongest attack spells, and all at the same time they unleash hell on the goblin camp. By the time they are done, almost all the goblins have been killed, so the only ones left are the goblin general and a few of the goblin knights. Sophia says she will handle the goblin knights, so Takumi is left to deal with the goblin general, and rather than fight it with his spear, he opts to just set it on fire to finish it off. Once they've finally confirmed that all the goblins are dead, they gather all the magic stones and return to the guild. But the 3 of them are absolutely exhausted from all that work. Han can hardly believe that they managed to complete their quest and even took down a goblin general in only half a day, so he asks them to come to the meeting room for a minute because the guild master wants to see them. Barak is both amazed and angry that Takumi would do something as reckless as face an entire goblin camp with a single party, but just as he is about to begin scolding Takumi, his pocket dimension opens up and Maple pops out. She has now evolved into an Arachne, so everyone is excited to see her new form, and at this point, Barak decides to just let the whole reckless battle thing slide since Takumi's party clearly isn't normal. Once they get back home, Maria asks Takumi if he has any spare cloth since she wants to make underwear for herself and Sophia, but Takumi has a much better idea for an underwear design, so he offers to make it for her instead. Just then, Maple pops out of the pocket dimension and tells Takumi that Papik is here to see him, so Takumi goes to meet with him and is informed that the Lord of Bolton, Marcus Godwin, wants to meet with him. Takumi would like to avoid meeting Marcus Godwin, but given the situation, he has no choice. Takumi later arrives at Godwin's castle, and thankfully, Godwin seems to be a reasonable man since the first thing he does is thank Takumi for making all those toilets because it greatly improved the sanitation of the town. Not to mention that Takumi took down a goblin encampment that would have become a major problem if left unchecked. He recognizes that Takumi is an asset to the nation, so he warns him that he will need to be careful, because Stedonia is bound to come after him eventually. A few days later, Takumi finally finishes making the underwear for Sophia and Maria, but it was way harder than he thought it would be, so he looks absolutely drained. Sophia and Maria are really grateful and tell him that they love the design, so he absent-mindedly asks them if they would like to try the underwear on now so he can see how it fits. A second later, he realizes that he just implied something inappropriate, so runs out of the room in embarrassment, and Maria and Sophia are a little disappointed because they were totally willing to do it if he had stayed. After all that excitement, Takumi had to cool off, so he decided that his next project would be to create refrigerators. Once he is done, he explains to the girls that the fridges will be used to keep food cold so it doesn't go bad, and they are all excited to feel the cold air coming from it. To create the fridges, Takumi synthesized iron, chromium, and nickel into stainless steel, and then he added a magical device enchanted with cooling magic. But unfortunately, his fridge can't run Halo. Even so, Maria thanks Takumi for it since she can now cook with fresh ingredients whenever she wants. Takumi intends to give one of the fridges to Maria, and the other 2 will be sent over to Papik so he can sell them. And once that's done, Takumi plans to move on to his next project, Sophia asks him if he's going to be making something new again, but actually, Takumi was thinking about making some adjustments to their equipment. There are a few things he has been wanting to tweak ever since their fight with all those goblins, and since they'll be traveling soon, Takumi wants their gear to be as good as possible, so he'd like to make a set out of mithril and adamantite. Takumi heads to the guild to ask Hans if there are any blacksmiths around who know how to work with adamantite and mithril, but the metals are really rare, so there aren't many people who fit that description. If Hans had to guess, the only people who would be able to handle it are the dwarves from Namstal, but that's a long way away, so Takumi can't go there. Takumi accepts that he isn't going to be able to find a suitable blacksmith after all, but before he leaves, Hans tells him about a city known as Horus near the kingdom of Barkula, and if Takumi heads there, he should be able to mine some mithril and adamantite. Although he might have a little trouble getting in since only members of the blacksmith guild are allowed into the mines. Luckily, Hans knows of a great way around the rules. Let's say hypothetically, of course, that Takumi just happened to accept a quest to exterminate the monsters that appear in that mine, and hypothetically happened to come across some mithril along the way. Nothing would be stopping him from mining the metals then. On that note, the guild master appears out of nowhere and says he has the perfect quest for Takumi. He explains that the guild has been running low on tree and wood lately and winter's coming, so they need someone to gather some. The treants usually wander around the Horus mines, and since Takumi is looking for an excuse to go into the mines anyway, the guild master thinks he should be fine with doing a little wood collecting. Additionally, since Takumi is heading there anyway, the guild master wants him and his party to escort someone, but this is starting to sound like a lot of work. Takumi has never handled an escort mission before, so he asks why the members of Lion Fang can't do it instead. The guild master explains that Lion Fang is currently out on a separate mission, so they can't do it, and Takumi is the only other person he can ask. Takumi eventually agrees to take on the escort mission, but he still doesn't know much about the route to Horus, so he asks Hans how long it takes to get there. Hans tells him it takes 7 days if you go by horse-drawn carriage, but it'll only take 4 days if you use a monster horse instead, since they are twice as fast as regular horse. Takumi thinks the monster horse is a great idea, so he asks if he can take one of those, but unfortunately, Riel shows up to tell him that all the monster horses are already being used by Lion's Fang. Hans is surprised to see Riel back so soon, but Riel says he and his party aren't done with their quest yet. He just happened to kill a black buffalo along the way, so he came back to drop it off before it went rancid. He's got to head back out in the morning so he can catch up with the rest of Lion's Fang, but since Riel will be staying in town for the night, Takumi offers to let him stay at his house and have a bath. Riel is excited by the prospect of a bath, so he decides to take Takumi up on that offer. Takumi is glad to hear it, but he actually has somewhere to go after this, so he says Riel can just wait for him at his house. But Riel says he would rather accompany Takumi. In that case, Takumi lets Riel accompany him to Papek's company, and while Takumi is there, he manages to convince Papek to let him borrow a couple of his monster horses for his mission. But in return, Papek asks that Takumi sell him some of the ores he gets from the Horus mine. Also, about the refrigerator he brought earlier, Papek really likes it, so he asks Takumi to make some more for him once he gets back from his mining trip. Meanwhile, back at Takumi's mansion, Sophia is starting to get really worried that something might have happened to him since he hasn't returned yet. Later that evening, Takumi is walking back home with Riel, and he apologizes for dragging Riel on such a long errand even though he must be tired from his journey, but Riel doesn't mind since he is the one who said he'd accompany Takumi. Just then, Riel senses someone watching him and Takumi with great hostility. He can already tell that he can't beat this person with the equipment he has on hand, so he grabs Takumi's hand and starts running. However, the assailant swiftly catches up to them and kicks Riel across the face. She then reveals herself to be Sophia, and she is convinced that Riel must have been trying to kidnap Takumi, so she is prepared to cut him down without question. However, before she could kill Riel, Takumi jumps in front of him and tells Sophia she has the wrong idea about the whole situation. After explaining what's going on, Sophia kneels down to sincerely apologize to Riel for nearly killing for no reason. Riel is alright, so he forgives Sophia, but he has a lot of questions he wants to ask Takumi after this. And the list of questions only gets longer when they finally get to Takumi's house and Riel finds more cute girls there. He asks Takumi what's going on, so Takumi explains that he needed a maid to take care of a house and someone to guard him, so he hired Sophia and Maria. And then there's Maple, who happened to evolve at one point. Riel is excited to see Maple again in her new form, and Maple remembers him, but she still doesn't like Riel though. Riel falls to his knees in defeat because both Bogar and Heath already have wives, and even Takumi has 2 girlfriends while he is single. Takumi corrects Riel and tells him that he isn't dating either Sophia or Maria. After hearing this, Riel takes the opportunity to shoot his shot and asks Sophia if she'd consider going out with him, But she immediately turns him down, and so does Maria, so Riel is once again left defeated. A little while later, as Riel is crying in the bath, Takumi talks to Maria and Sophia about the mission he accepted so he can go mine some mithril and adamantite. Sophia thinks it's a good idea since treant wood is a precious material and everyone else is on board, so Takumi says they will head out in 3 days' time. The next morning, Riel leaves to rejoin the rest of Lion's Fang, and once he is gone, Takumi decides to begin working on some new equipment for his party's treant hunt. He gets himself a magic-draining tungsten carbide sword, and it is already a great weapon. But it's too big to use as it is now, which is why Takumi plans to break it down. He tries using his alchemy skill on it, but the sword seems to be resisting him, so it takes a lot more effort than usual. But eventually, Takumi is able to break the metal down and make 2 separate blades with it. The blades drain the mana of any opponent who is cut with it, so Takumi is happy with the results, although it left him totally drained. 3 days later, Takumi and the others meet with Papek to collect the carriage he promised to give them, and the guide the guild master asked them to escort is already waiting inside. So Takumi goes to talk to him, and the man introduces himself as Gambo. The group sets out, but along the way they have to stop by a field so Takumi and the others can hunt their treants. As they enter the forest, Sophia spots a treant trying to blend in with the other trees nearby, so she points it out to Takumi, and he charges forward to eliminate it. The treant tries to attack Takumi in the process, but Sophia and Maria have his back, so he is easily able to chop it down. However, that was just one treant, so they've still got an entire forest's worth to take down. They'll take too long to kill each treant individually, so Sophia suggests that they should use magic, and it seems to be working really well. However, they are soon confronted by an elder treant, and no matter how much magic they use to attack it, it keeps regenerating. The only way to finish it off is to cut down its main body in one go, so Sophia tells Takumi to coat his sword in fire and attack while she and Maria provide cover. Together, they are finally able to take down the leader treant, and that's it for their treant hunting, so they can continue with their journey to Horus. Upon arriving in Horus, they head to the local adventurers guild, and there, Gambo points out a quest that says it needs people to exterminate the mole monsters in the mines. These moles eat ores, so they are considered a serious threat, and if they take this mission, then they will be allowed to enter the mines. A little while later, the group is mining in the mines, and they get really lucky because it doesn't take long for them to find some mithril and adamantite ore. However, the ores attract some monster moles from the ground, so they have to get ready to fight. Before the mole surfaces, Takumi thinks about it for a second and comes up with a great idea, so as soon as the mole shows itself, he blinds it with light magic and it collapses, so it is easily finished off. Takumi's method certainly makes it easy to take out the moles, but Sophia and Maria are a little disappointed since that means they won't get to do any fighting. Since the mining trip was successful, they all return to Bolton a few days later, and once they do, Takumi visits Gambo's shop so he can learn how to work with mithril and adamantite. Gambo explains the process of extracting the metal from the ore, and after a lot of effort, Takumi is able to create some mithril and adamantite, so he starts using it to make all kinds of magic-imbued gear. Once he is done with the new gear, he gives it to Maria and Sophia so they can test it out. The girls are amazed by how light and durable their armor is now, and it even has magic imbued in it. Takumi explains that he loaded their gear with magic that suits their preferred element, and as for his own armor, he imbued it with something called Thunderclap, and it is basically an extreme agility buff, so Takumi can move insanely fast with it. However, the second Takumi tries to do something cool by showing off how fast he is, the universe refuses to let it happen, and he ends up crashing face first into a wall. Moving on, Takumi shows them the new weapons he made, as well as the enchantments he placed in them. Sophia and Maria both love their new spears, but Sophia has a request she would like to make. She would gladly lay down her life to protect Takumi, so she asks if he can make a shield for her so she can protect him more efficiently. Takumi thinks that's a good idea, but he reminds Sophia that she should value her own life just as much as she values his life. Nolan has been watching Takumi all this time, and she is happy with all the progress he is making because he is certainly going to need all the strength he can get to face his upcoming battles. 1 year in the future, where the other heroes were summoned, we see Akira and Yamato after their training is complete. They are being sent on a mission by the king of Samandar, and I'm not gonna lie, they look pretty evil now. Back in Takumi's time, he has just finished working on the shields Sophia asked for. And although Sophia is the one who requested it, she feels bad after seeing how much it drains Takumi, so she wishes he had an assistant who could help him with his production. Meanwhile, over in the royal capital, the Lord receives a letter from Sidonia. It seems that they have heard about Takumi's toilets and the purification magic used in them, and although they don't know who Takumi is yet, they plan to take action against him. Said action involves the church sending a messenger to meet with the king of Barkula. After learning about the toilets of purification magic that are used in Barcula, the Church of Divine Light tattled, issued an appeal to the Pope in Sidonia. As a result, they got the Pope to declare that purification magic is a gift from their god, and they want to be the only ones who can use it, so they demand that the King of Barcula hand over the patent for the purification magic circles. And additionally, they demand that the king tell him who was behind the creation of these purification devices in the first place. The king listens to the church's demands, but seeing as those are some stupid demands, he is choosing to ignore them. The church's messenger is shocked that the king would dare to go against the church, so he threatens to order all the church priests in Barcula to return to Sidonia at once. However, the king isn't scared of that threat and in fact encourages him to do so. Takumi eventually hears about the king's decision, and he's glad the king didn't sell him out, but he's also a little worried about the king rejecting the Church of Divine Light so harshly. Sidonia's church is bound to turn against the kingdom of Barcula, and Takumi would hate it if such a big conflict were to start because of him, but Papek tells him there's nothing to worry about. After all, the Church of Divine Light isn't the only religion that exists in this world. There's the Church of Divine Light, and then there's the Church of Creation, but even though the Church of Divine Light's influence is far spread, there are still a lot of followers of the Church of Creation in this country, so the Church of Divine Light won't be missed. On top of that, the priests of the Church of Creation administer recovery magic to anyone in need, but the Church of Divine Light charges hefty fees for any holy magic. The Church of Divine Light is backed by Sidonia, so Takumi is probably going to have to avoid them from now on, but is what it is. Anyway, the reason Papek came to see Takumi today is because he presented Takumi's toilet and refrigerator to the king a while ago, and the king was so impressed that he asked Papek to bring Takumi to meet him. Takumi is a little wary of meeting someone as important as the king, but Papek assures him that the king isn't ordering him to do it, so he has the right to refuse if he wants. But Papek really wants him to agree since it would help his company's relationship with the royal capital. Takumi eventually agrees to the meeting, so later that evening he tells Sophia and Maria about it and asks them if they would be willing to accompany him to the royal capital, Bakalotos. Both say they would love to go with Takumi, so he suggests that they depart a week from now. But in the meantime, there's a lot of stuff they need to get ready. The trip to the royal capital will take about 7 days, so Maria is going to need to pack a lot of food in advance. And while she does that, Takumi says he will be working on new cloaks for Maria and Sophia. He got some dark element magic stones from Papek, and if he uses those to make the cloaks, then he can enchant them with a perception blocking spell. A spell like that would be really useful in combat, but the main reason Takumi wants to make it is so that when they make it to the royal capital, Sophia and Maria won't get harassed. Later on, Sophia and Maria head out to do some shopping, and while picking out some fruit, Maria complains that Takumi doesn't have enough confidence in himself. Sophia agrees and points out that Takumi has good looks, has an amazing talent for alchemy, and an incredible knack for invention. She continues listing off all of Takumi's good qualities, but Maria notices how enthusiastic Sophia is when she talks about Takumi, so she gets the feeling that Sophia might be in love with him. Sophia denies having such impure thoughts and says she only loves Takumi as her master, but Maria knows there's a love story in there somewhere. Meanwhile, Takumi is back at the church in town and kneels down in front of the statue of Nolan to pray to her. Before long, light begins to shine down on Takumi, and he finds himself up in Nolan's domain, where she warmly greets him. It's been a while since she last saw Takumi, and she heard about his invitation to the royal capital, so if he's here to pray for safe travels, then he should have brought an offering for her. Takumi tells her that he's just here because he has a few questions he wanted to ask her. The goddess that the Church of Divine Light worships is called Enat, so first he asks Nolan if there's really another goddess besides her. Nolan asserts that she is the only real goddess here, but if that's the case, then Takumi asks what Enat is meant to be. Nolan doesn't want to reveal too much, so she says Takumi will find out about that when the time comes. While he's here, Takumi also asks Nolan if she knows what's become of the other heroes that were summoned with him. It has been 10 months since Takumi got here, and normally something like heroes being summoned from another world would cause a huge commotion, but Takumi hasn't heard anyone talk about it. Nolan comes clean and admits that when she summoned Takumi, she messed with time a little to send him 1 year into the past, so the heroes technically haven't been summoned yet. It'll be another couple of months before the heroes get summoned, but Takumi doesn't understand why she would go through all the trouble of sending him back in time, so he asks for an explanation. Unfortunately, Nolan says his time's up, so she won't be answering any more questions for now, and she also asks him to bring her sweets as an offering next time he visits her. Takumi tries to tell her he has more questions to ask, but Nolan chops him on the head, knocking him back down to the mortal world. Takumi later wakes up on the floor of the church, and he gets the feeling that Nolan was avoiding his questions about the other heroes, but he has no intention of getting involved with them in the first place, so it doesn't matter. He then heads back home to finish up those new cloaks he wanted to make for the girls, and once he's done, he gives it to them. Both Maria and Sophia love the designs, and Takumi is glad to hear it, but there's something else he wants to work on before their trip. He leads both of them to his workshop and shows them that he plans to make a carriage for himself. Since they've been traveling a lot recently, he feels like it would be more efficient to make a comfortable carriage for them to use rather than having to borrow one every time. However, even if he can make his own carriage, he still doesn't have a horse, so he's going to need to borrow one from the guild. Maria tells him there's no need for that since they can just get one of those too. The Forest of Death outside Bolton has a ton of monsters in it, and if they search long enough, they'll probably find a unicorn or drake horse, which would be way faster than a regular monster horse. Maria seems really excited about going out to catch a horse, but Takumi can't help but feel a little nervous. They eventually head out in search of a horse, and while on their way into the forest, Takumi asks Sophia if drake horses are significantly faster than the monster horses they get from the guild. She confirms this and tells him that a drake horse possesses speed, stamina, and durability that far exceeds that of a regular monster horse. The drake horses look pretty much the same as regular horses, but they have a huge rhino horn and dragon scales along their body, so it should be pretty easy to spot if they come across one. Just then, Maple calls out to the three of them and says they should hurry up so they can find a horse already. Maple is clearly very motivated, but that's just because she's excited to get a new friend once Takumi forms a familiar contract with a horse. However, before the others could catch up to Maple, Sophia senses a monster nearby, so she readies her sword, but as a bush wolf jumps out of the bushes, it just runs past them instead of attacking. Takumi proudly states that the wolf didn't see them because of their anti-perception cloaks, but while Sophia is certainly impressed by the effectiveness of the cloaks, she thinks it might be a good idea to take them off so they can actually fight some monsters. A few moments after taking the cloak off, Sophia manages to slay a boar in a single blow. Maria thinks this is great since she can prepare the boar meat for them to use on their trip. Maple is getting impatient and tells everyone to hurry up already, but then Takumi notices a dead tree on the ground, and he could really use the wood since he's making a carriage, so he and Sophia get ready to begin cutting it up. Now Maria is busy with the meat and Takumi is busy with the tree, so Maple gives up on waiting for them and decides to go ahead by herself to find a horse. While making her way through the forest, Maple notices that there are a ton of dead treants in the area, so she wonders what could have done something like this. As she heads further into the forest, she eventually comes across a drake laying on the ground, and it looks like it's in rough shape. Maple approaches it and asks if it's wounded. The drake immediately fires a lightning strike at Maple, so she backs away from it, but she can tell that it's just scared because it's injured, and she understands the feeling since that was the same way she felt before Takumi found her. She tells the drake that it doesn't need to worry since her master is a really nice person, so he will heal it once he gets here. All they have to do is wait for a while, but doesn't look like they'll be able to wait in peace because two termite monsters suddenly show up and they don't look friendly. Maple realizes that the termites are the ones who hurt the drake, so she uses her webs to capture them and throws their bodies in front of the drake to be electrocuted, but there are a lot more termites, so they might be in trouble here. To protect herself and the drake, Maple weaves a barrier out of her silk, but while it may have bought her some time, the termites are eventually going to tear their way through. Maple tries calling for help from Takumi, but when she tries to establish a connection with him, he doesn't respond at all. She starts worrying that he may have gotten so excited about the wood he found that he forgot about her. Hopelessness sets in as the termites finally tear through her barrier, so Maple closes her eyes and awaits death. However, when she opens her eyes again, she finds Takumi standing over her, and he's so glad that she's alright. Maple jumps into his arms out of relief that he actually came to save her because she was so worried when he didn't respond to her call, so Takumi explains that the cause was likely the barrier she put up. It was well made for blocking out attacks, but the interwoven layers also block out all mana signals so her call couldn't reach him. But as soon as Takumi realizes he had lost Maple's signal, he came running to her last known location. He then notices the drake behind Maple, and Maple asks him to save it, so he extends his hand and tries to use healing magic on it. However, the drake repels him since it doesn't trust Takumi. Sophia tells Takumi that they need to leave soon since there may be more termites in the area, but if they leave the drake out here on its own, it is bound to die, so Takumi decides to put it in his pocket dimension with Maple until they get home. Sophia warns him that he can't put such a high-level beast in his pocket dimension without forming a contract first because it will put tremendous strain on his body, but Takumi thinks he will be fine. As it turns out, Takumi was not fine. He passed out almost immediately after putting the drake in his pocket dimension, and even after the girls brought him home, he still hasn't woken up for the past 12 hours. The fact that the Drake is still in his pocket dimension means Takumi's mana will continue to be sapped until he eventually withers away. And he can't open the barrier to let the Drake out because he's unconscious, so Sophia gets in touch with Maple and asks her to open the pocket dimension from inside. Maple says she can do that, but the Drake will be frightened if it suddenly appears in unfamiliar territory, so she says she'll make a tent out in the front yard to keep it calm. Once the Drake is out of the pocket dimension, Takumi should be able to recover, so in the meantime, Maria heads out to buy some medical supplies to treat him and asks Sophia to stay by Takumi's side so he has someone next to him when he wakes up. Later that night, Takumi finally wakes up from his coma and heads outside to see the Drake. Maple has been telling the Drake all about Takumi while they waited for him to recover, and after introducing himself, Takumi asked it if it would be willing to form a contract with him. The Drake trusts Maple, and since Maple is vouching for Takumi, it agrees to the contract. Now that Takumi has tamed the Drake, he can finally use magic on it without having to worry about backlash. So he immediately casts High Heal on the Drake to heal all its wounds. In the next moment, the Drake is able to stand on its own again and is back to full strength. But now that she's officially one of Takumi's familiars, he has to come up with a name for it. Since he names Maple after a leaf, he decides to keep the theme and names the Drake Camellia after the tree that retains its leaves all year round. Maple is glad that Camellia is all better now, and since everything has been settled, Maria calls everyone inside for dinner because she made a lot of tasty food and Takumi hasn't eaten in a full day because he was unconscious. Over in a slave trading company known as Palom, a beast girl named Rava is meeting with a prospective master, but while the client is indeed impressed with her aptitude for magic, he asks Ava if she knows how to use any practical magic spells. Ava says she doesn't know any useful spells yet, but she will try her hardest to learn so she can be useful to him. However, the man tells her he can't purchase her, because he needs someone who can help him now, and he doesn't have time to wait for Rava to train. But he does acknowledge that she is quite unique, so he wishes her the best of luck in finding a master for herself. Once the client leaves, Rava apologizes to Palom for getting rejected yet again, but he tells her she doesn't need to worry herself because sooner or later the right master for her will turn up. Rava tries to remain hopeful, but it's been several years since she got here and she still hasn't managed to find anyone to be her master. She thinks back to her old life with her younger brother and how she was forced to sell herself off as a slave to make money and take care of her family. But despite all that, she hasn't managed to make a single cent yet. Over in Takumi's house, he is still working as hard as he can to finish his carriage, and it's starting to worry Maria. She asks Takumi if he plans to go back to Digembo's workshop today, and Takumi confirms it since there's a lot of blacksmithing work that needs to be done before the trip. Sophia tells him he might be overworking himself a little because on top of all the effort he's been putting in to finish the carriage, he still has to make more potions and refrigerators for Papek. Not to mention that Takumi hasn't taken a single break in the last few days, so at this rate, she's worried he might work himself to death. Takumi appreciates that both of them are so concerned about his well-being, but he assures them that he is fine, so he heads out as planned. His first stop for the day is the guild, but as he enters, he hears a man desperately trying to get the guild master to believe him because he saw something horrific. Takumi walks up to the front desk and asks Hans what all the commotion is about, so Hans explains that there have been several reports of people seeing a strange creature outside. Takumi asks what kind of creature it is, but no one knows what it looks like, although Hans has drawn a sketch based on what the witnesses told him. Even with the sketch, it's still not clear what the creature is, but Hans isn't too worried about it since there haven't been any damage reports yet. Anyway, he asks Takumi what brings him to the guild today, so Takumi explains that he wants to register a new pet he just got. Hans is impressed that Takumi managed to tame another pet, and considering the stuff Takumi has done so far, he was already expecting it to be somewhat strange, but he is absolutely horrified when Takumi pulls Camilla out of his pocket dimension. Then he takes a look at his sketch, and he realizes that Camilla is the monster that everyone has been so scared of. And now that they know Takumi was the cause of all the panic, the guild master pulls him into a meeting to scold him until he begs for mercy. Meanwhile, Sophia is out in town because she just got back from a meeting with Mulan. She was there to ask if Mulan had any slaves with magical abilities who could help Takumi with his work, but unfortunately, she didn't have anyone who fit that description. Instead, Mulan suggested that Sophia could try taking a look at other slave trading companies to see if they have any slaves that fit the requirements she is looking for. As she is walking back home, she meets up with Maria, who is out shopping for ingredients to make lunch. She noticed how exhausted Takumi has been feeling lately, so she really wants to make him feel better with her cooking. But when she and Sophia head to Digembo's workshop to check on Takumi, they find him knocked out in a pile of wood. They are shocked at first, but Digembo tells them there's nothing to worry about since Takumi just fell asleep while he was working. And it's not hard to imagine why when Takumi has been working so hard without resting. And despite how exhausted he must have been, he kept working hard with a smile right up until the point he passed out. He's going to be fine for now, but Daiganbo warns the girls that if they don't get Takumi to stop working so hard, he might actually die one day. A little while later, once Takumi wakes up from his nap, he finishes the carriage and he looks so proud of himself for it. And he has every right to be proud too, because he broke the laws of physics to make this thing. It looks like a regular carriage on the outside, but on the inside it's the size of a house. Takumi put a lot of work into enchanting this carriage with spatial magic to make the inside bigger, and he even outfitted it with all the daily necessities, so even the longest road trips will feel comfy. Everyone hops in so they can take it out for a test ride, and Maria is having the time of her life driving it. Even though the carriage is moving at terrifying speeds, you can hardly feel any vibrations from the inside, so there's no risk of motion sickness. They've still got time before their scheduled trip, so Takumi tells Maria that she can make suggestions on anything she wants him to add to the carriage, and since he offered, she asks him for death spikes. Spikes on the side have no useful functionality whatsoever, but it'd be cool though. Takumi acknowledges Maria's suggestion and promptly ignores it, so they carry on as usual, and a few days later, it is time for their trip. They pull up to the city gate and meet Lion's Fang there, since they'll be the ones escorting them on their journey to the capital. Paipek and the others soon arrive as well, and since everyone is here, Takumi thinks it's time for them to get going. However, before they leave, Paipek is a little curious about what a carriage built by Takumi would look like, so he asks if he can take a look inside. Takumi tells him to go right ahead, so Paipek steps inside, and the second he sees the house inside, he freaks out. He frantically begins asking Takumi to tell him how he managed to make such a marvelous carriage and offers to pay him handsomely for the information, but he has some sense knocked into him by Lord Godwin, because he doesn't want Paipek to make Takumi uncomfortable. But then Godwin starts loudly exclaiming how he would love to have a carriage as wonderful as Takumi's, and while he's not ordering Takumi to make one for him, if Takumi were to give him one as a gift, he would be so thankful that he would be willing to pay 100 platinum coins. Takumi does some quick math in his head and realizes that 100 platinum is roughly 1 billion yen, and with that kind of money on the table, how could he refuse? For now, the group sets out on their journey with Takumi and his party in his carriage, while Godwin and Paipek use their own respective carriages. As they ride, Godwin talks to his assistant about how much of an asset Takumi has become for the kingdom ever since he showed up. He is sure Takumi will eventually reach even greater heights, but all his accomplishments are bound to draw unwanted attention. And while the king and Godwin will do everything they can to shield Takumi from threats within the kingdom of Barkula, the Empire of Sidonia will still be very difficult to deal with. Speaking of the Empire of Sidonia, we take a look into the future after the other heroes were summoned, and Akane is reading an old Sidonian history book to gather as much information as she can. The book talks about the goddess Anat that Sidonia worships, and it says she created humanity in her likeness. Then she created beastmen from beasts and elves from sprites, all to serve under mankind. That is why beastmen in the Empire of Sidonia are treated so poorly, and Akane can't stand it. Back to Takumi's time, he and the others have just arrived at the capital, and Takumi is happy they managed to make it here safely without being attacked. But the only reason for that was because Takumi's party kept wiping out all the monsters that got even slightly close to them. In fact, Lion's Fang literally did nothing the entire time, even though they are meant to be the bodyguards here. Just then, Paipek approaches Takumi and says he has something to talk to him about, so once they reach the inn, he tells Takumi that he wants to gift the king a carriage similar to the one Takumi made for himself. He already talked this over with Lord Godwin, and he thinks this would be the perfect way to demonstrate Takumi's expertise to the king. Although since their audience with the king is only 5 days away, Paipek doesn't think Takumi will be able to make one in time, so he suggests they wait until the next time they have an audience with the king. However, Takumi surprisingly says he can do it within the 5 days. If he made it after getting home, then he would have to transport the carriage all the way back to the capital, and that's way too much work, so he thinks it would be better to just make it while he's already here. It shouldn't be too hard to find the necessary materials in the capital, but the main problem is that Takumi needs somewhere to begin building, and he doesn't have a workshop in the capital. Thankfully, Paipek says he knows the perfect place for Takumi to do all his work, the Palom Company. Takumi later meets with Maria and Sophia to tell them about Paipek's proposition for him to work at the Palom Company, and Sophia happens to know a bit about the Palom Company, so she tells Takumi it's one of the more trustworthy slave trading companies in the capital, at least according to what Mulan told her. Paipek got permission for Takumi to use one of the Palom Company's old detached buildings, so as soon as the materials arrive, Takumi intends to begin working on the new carriage. However, Sophia refuses to let that happen. So she tells Takumi that he needs to get himself an assistant. He nearly worked himself to death building the first carriage, and now he wants to start working on a second one without stopping to take a break. Even a workaholic like him has to realize that he is being reckless with his health, so Sophia asks him to get himself another slave while they are at the Palom Company. Takumi understands that Sophia and Maria are genuinely worried for his well-being, so he agrees to get a new slave, and the next day he meets with the owner of the Palom Company. Takumi tells him that he is looking for a slave to help him with his alchemy, and since Takumi is currently working on a carriage that has various magical elements, Palom assumes Takumi would need a slave who has magical aptitude. While Takumi is having his meeting, Sophia is standing outside, but all of a sudden, Maria comes running up to her in a panic because she can't find Maple anywhere. Maple said something about wanting to explore the Palom building earlier, and if anyone sees a killer spider roaming the halls, they are going to freak out, so Sophia says she's going to go look for Maple before she causes any trouble. Unfortunately, by the time she finds Maple, she has already scared the soul out of Rava, who was just trying to enjoy her book. Maple apologizes for scaring Rava, and Sophia helps her back to her feet, but as she does so, she notices that the book Rava is carrying is a book about alchemy. She asks Rava if she's interested in alchemy, and she begins telling her about how much she loves studying alchemy. A few minutes later, Rava is brought into the meeting room to meet with Takumi, since Palom suggested her as a good candidate for Takumi's needs. Rava greets Takumi and takes his seat so they can begin their discussion, but as Takumi is telling her about the tasks he needs completed, Rava is completely zoned out because she's worried she will get rejected again and won't get to make any money for her family. Just then, Takumi mentions something about needing someone who is somewhat knowledgeable in alchemy, and as soon as Rava hears the word alchemy, she shoots up because alchemy is her thing. She loves alchemy just as much as Takumi does, so the two start talking about their favorite methods and theories, and Takumi is so impressed by her that he decides to give Rava a little quiz. He tears a piece of paper out from one of his journals and asks her if she can figure out what this magic circle is for. Rava takes one look at it, and she can tell that it's a recomposition circle used to make sweets, but there's something off about it, and she doesn't know what it is. She starts having an exam-induced panic attack and starts crying because she can't answer Takumi's question. She tells him she doesn't know the answer because this isn't the same candy spell she knows, and she was fully expecting Takumi to reject her for failing his test, but on the contrary, he extends his hand and invites her to join his party. She was actually right about the circle being used to make candy, but it was slightly different because Takumi uses different ingredients in his candy. Nevertheless, Takumi thinks it's amazing that she was able to figure out what the magic circle was just by looking at it, so he tells her he would love to have her as a part of his team. Since Takumi has accepted Rava, Palom creates the contract between them, and Rava is glad to finally be employed, but she asks him if he can do a small favor for her. She wants him to help her send all her wages back to her home village. Rava explains that her family is very poor, so she wants to support them as much as possible so her brother can have a better life. And if that's what she really wants, then Takumi sees no reason to refuse. Meanwhile, the king of Sidonia is getting ready to retaliate against the kingdom of Barkula for refusing to hand Takumi over, so the king plans to send out the Holy Knights to make an example of them. But the princess has a better idea. They will soon be summoning their heroes, so she plans to start rumors to build hatred for the people of Barkula among Sidonian. And once they had summoned their heroes, they will find an excuse to wage war and get their revenge. This was the end of episode 7. Subscribe to not miss the next part.